Yes.
Hello, hello.
A
Hello.
little, a little, a little.
Hola.
I'm Fumi.
Oh, nice to meet you, Fumi. I'm Tyrell.
I'm Kyrie.
Taiwo is
I'm
so is that your
Louise.
twin? No.
That's my brother. No, he's my older brother.
Oh, okay, because he looks like you. I
Nice.
figured he was the twin. I know Taiwo is twin.
You know, I was telling you, you clocked on really well.
Well, I
Like,
started going down there in 2016, so
is it?
yeah, that's when I
How'd you find it?
started learning about the Yoruba culture and just Nigeria as a whole. I love all of Nigeria, not just Yoruba culture. It's just that Yoruba culture is just dear to my heart.
Of course, man. You know, I
Yeah.
said to you, like, you're like the lost sister.
But
Like,
okay, so I wanted to ask you guys because I feel like it's super important to have this conversation. You guys are all from Lagos, Nigeria?
yeah, we're all
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Lagos. Yeah.
Okay, so I see a lot of people that are native Africans and they make posts and they say things like Black Americans. What do you
Yeah.
think that like what is that all about? I don't get that.
I think it's just all about. I think it's more like with the dispersion. Like, how do I explain this? I think it's when you see something foreign, right? You don't really know how to deal with it. This is just coming from like our perspective. It's like, oh yeah, it's quite different, but we're kind of the same. It's quite different, but we're not the same, kind of thing. I don't agree with that, but I think initially that's how most people think when they talk about, oh yeah, most African people want to talk about the black diaspora. Like, we're the same, but we're different. So they like to have that sort of distinction. But at the same time, I feel like it's sort of human nature where we like to be different.
Mm-hmm.
We're so obsessed with identity and how we view ourselves. So usually when you see something that's different, even though it might be similar, just like, okay, we're the same, but yeah, this is where we draw the line,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. But I don't personally, I don't agree with it. But you guys could feel free to talk here, brother.
So what was the question again? Can you
Okay,
repeat
I
it?
just wanted to know how you guys felt about the term just Black Americans. And also I want to know how, like when you look at I call myself an Americanized African. But
That's a good way to say it.
when you look at us as Americanized Africans, what do you think of? Like, do you even consider us siblings? Like, do you look at us as your fellow brothers and sisters? Because a lot of times I'm finding myself explaining to Native Africans, like, yo, I'm African too. Like, you know, like no matter what our skin shade, whatever, as a Black American or Native African, you know, or whatever, we're all Africans. So
Yeah,
I feel like the problem is that we aren't united, and that's why we're looked at as minorities.
yeah,
Yeah, that's very accurate to be honest. And I feel like personally, when I meet another black person, whether they're from the UK or America or anything, I don't feel like there's a difference. Like I lived in Nigeria for 16 years, then I moved to Ghana for another 8 years,
Mm.
and then I moved to London. So like I've been ingrained in like African culture for like 24 years. So when I see someone like you, nothing would make me feel like you're any different from me except, oh, your accent.
Hmm.
Do you understand? That's the only thing that distinguishes us from each other. And the fact that, okay, yes, I've lived here for a while, and obviously maybe knowing about the culture from living in whatever country it is, be it Nigeria or Ghana, my knowledge of what the streets are like would be far different from what your knowledge of it is coming from like America or wherever it is. You understand?
Hmm.
So personally, I don't see any difference. I don't see any distinction. The only thing is, oh, the way we speak. Then it gives you a word. I'm like, oh shit, Americana, you understand, kind of thing. And
But
I'm like, oh, shit.
I think
What'd you say?
it's weird because when I like have these conversations, it's like the initial reaction is that we're separated. But as we continue to, you know, get to know each other and realize that we are the same, I just feel like the biggest issue, especially with what's going on in Black America right now with, you know, our
yeah,
siblings, you know, the men and all the things that's going on. I just feel like we need to unite. I feel like we need to figure out a way. How can we stop being considered minorities and join forces?
mm,
Like I want to hear Native African people speak up for us because
yeah,
Yeah.
I
yeah.
feel like this is why we were shipped here in the
Of course.
first place because, you know, just the fighting between the brothers. If we get things together within ourselves, I feel like no enemy can come in between that. We will be the powerful nation
Absolutely.
that we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
I think that's where it
Okay.
comes. Somebody said, does the separation come from the tribal wars that caused the division?
See, the thing is, I feel like with if I take it back a bit, I think with the human condition, like I sort of explained earlier, like we hold on to identity a lot, and when we see something that's foreign, when we see something that's just very different to what we know, it's like it just feels kind of alien. So I think with even amongst Nigerians ourselves, we've even got that problem where we don't even get along. I think we had this brief conversation earlier where I was like, we don't even get along ourselves, like because it's because there's a lot of distinctions between us, and it's like we kind of hold ourselves in, I don't want to say in a high regard, but we kind of see ourselves better than everyone else. It's not right. But
It's
hey,
like the
I'm
black
Nigerian.
man complex.
There we go. And it's like when you then see someone else, and when you see someone from a different, or like in diaspora, you meet someone who's Black British or someone who's Black American. It's like, okay, I already have that tribal sort of identity competition back home. So now I'm just bringing it here and using it against whoever I see next, kind of thing. But it's crazy because, like you said, when you look at the history of African culture, history of Black civilizations from way back, absolutely everything is linked together. Like we're literally the same people. But obviously things might have changed along the way, slavery, migration, all these sort of
What did they
things.
teach you guys about slavery? What exactly do you know about what happened to your siblings?
So you see the thing though, like I think I'll leave that to okay, I won't say much. But but the thing is with slavery, it's all right, but because I grew up in like my brother, I grew up in Nigeria, it wasn't really spoken about in Nigerian, and this just talk and I was talking to someone today about it. In Nigerian system of education, we weren't even taught slavery.
It's whitewashed.
And it's crazy because when Nigeria, and when we were taught history, the people that came through slave trade, right? They were seen as explorers. That's the word they use, explorers. Saviors, all these stuffs. And even till, I don't even remember.
Even right now, it's still like, that's the way the history is. It hasn't been corrected. There's so many things that have been omitted from Nigerian history, like the Biafra War and all of that. How amalgamation separated Nigeria rather than uniting it. You understand?
So the thing is, a lot of the history when it comes to slavery back home, it's like we don't even I can only speak for myself and what I went through, or the kind of education I went through, and it was mostly just talking about the good things. Oh, Nigeria came through. A guy from Portugal came, and like, oh yeah, bring the Niger, bring the Delta, and that's it. They don't really go into details about. You won't believe it was until I moved away 7 years ago now. Then I started to educate myself about, oh yeah, the African diaspora and things like what was it again? Like the Haitian Revolution and stuff like that. I didn't really know about these things.
I think for me as well, I'm somebody I've lived in the UK from when I was born, and going through primary school, I ended up going to Nigeria after year 7 or year 8. So that's like early stages of secondary. It wasn't really spoken about or discussed, especially growing up from such a young age. And then when going to Nigeria again, like they mentioned, it wasn't really discussed. For example, I don't know too much about the Biafran War. I know small elements of it, but I don't have, exact knowledge of what exactly happened and just the detailed knowledge. So it was about me actually going back and actually discovering what actually happened myself, rather than people actually educate me about it. So yeah.
And the thing is, I can't really even speak much about the British curriculum here because I wasn't here when it was being taught. But from the people and everyone I do know that's British that grew up here, and they might be Caribbean, they might be African, it seems like the same problem is being held. Like when we have Black History Month or history in general, they don't really teach them these things. like Black history or things that it doesn't go past Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
Malcolm X maybe, but like it's just very shallow, and it's so nuts because we're in a generation where people are waking up, and I don't know if you know about a lot of things that are going on here. Like at one point, in some secondary, in fact, today there's a really good university, Imperial College, London. It's a really big institution in the UK, and the slogan, I was just reading this today. The slogan was something had links to slavery and British colonization, and people call them for it because it was like, yeah, why are you still hanging on to this slogan or logo that talks about that basically reinforces British imperialism and colonization sort of thing? And they had to write like a whole statement saying, oh yeah, we're gonna take it down, and yeah, we agree that. So even history or the educational system here is whitewashed, like back
So that's
to
the
primary.
problem. Our people
That is
are
the problem.
destroyed for lack of knowledge. So I feel
That
like
is
as
it.
this younger generation, as we're coming in and we're learning and we're growing and we're connecting with each other, I think it's important that we spread the word to our family members. And I know it's
Oh,
hard
absolutely.
because I know especially African parents, they don't want to hear it. You can't educate them, they educate you.
Oh my God.
Uh,
Dude, can I stop you for a bit?
Yes.
I literally had
Vinny.
deja vu about this moment. I'm not even joking. I literally had deja vu about this moment. Like you said, the whole spreading it within your family members and stuff. So it feels like we've had this conversation before.
Okay.
And I'm not even joking, I swear. And I think what you're saying is, in terms of like, especially with what's been going on right now, like I wasn't even really aware of like why people were teaching about history in secondary schools and all of that before. I started reading it and I saw that they omitted a lot of details of what actually happened. I mean, Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. You can't discover a country or a
Something that
region
already
where
existed.
people are already like settled there. It doesn't make any sense. Do you understand? Literally to things like that. And it feels like people are more concerned with just being comfortable with what's or they're being told and actually going out to look for information. Do you understand? And one thing I realized even in UK is a lot of African British people have lost that connection to the roots. Basically, like they don't. There's a way where people like I've
I'll
noticed
get to that.
over here, kind of like condescend Africans. Do you understand?
They call
They feel like,
themselves
oh yeah,
European too.
yeah, more or less. And I'm like,
Yeah, it's like
let me finish. There was this. Remember during Black Panther and everything when people were wearing like African attire and stuff. So my Twitter, yeah, this girl was like, "Oh, black people are wearing like
traditional African prints and stuff.
yeah, exactly." And she's black, and she was like, "Oh my God, this is so embarrassing." And I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Like you are literally African. You're even darker than she's literally darker than me. Do you understand?" And I'm like, exactly. Is it that bad that we actually just forget whenever we move to Europe or America or wherever it is, we just literally forget where we're coming from. We don't even like pay homage to the culture because literally the moment I started embracing like who I was as a Nigerian, honestly, there's nothing anybody can say to me that would affect me because I've accepted it, both the good and the bad, and it makes me who I am. You get me? But I just feel sorry for people that they don't really know. I was talking to someone before. She was like, "Oh, she doesn't really know where she belongs because she hasn't been home before. She's tried to talk to her dad about telling her about where they're from. They're from Congo and stuff like that. And it's like, oh yeah, he'll get her pictures, but he never really said anything while she was growing up. So now she just feels like she's in limbo because her grandparents as well don't talk about where they're from and everything. And she just wants to know more. She wants her kids to know, oh, this is where we originated from.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much you try to say, see, you can have 5 generations of kids or 10 generations of kids in the Western world, but you're not from here. The moment you go back home,
I think it's an opportunity.
I think that like, do you want to talk to it all?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I think it's just a matter of opportunity because I would say when I was living here I didn't have I didn't embrace the culture. I didn't know as much as the culture until I suddenly moved over there and had that opportunity to understand what my culture is about and get, you know, that full understanding for me to now embrace it fully, because I feel more comfortable now. Yes, I'm a full Nigerian. I'm not from here, although I was brought up here and raised here. But going over there, you know, gathering that full knowledge of what my country is about, and you know, knowing how people living over there and my culture, because I am Yoruba, fully understanding my tribe as well. Yeah, I just felt it was really important, and I embrace it now that I've gone there and come back. I embrace it much more than I used to.
And the thing is, one very interesting thing about the UK, I'm not really sure if it's like that in America, even though I've got family there. I don't really know if it's the same, but a lot of parents, a lot of African parents. I can't speak for the Caribbeans. That's even another thing that we will get into.
I know.
But a lot of the Africans here, it's like they expect their kids. From what I've seen, the Africans that raise their kids here, they expect their kids to be fully African. But at the same time, it's really good. But at the same time, they shame them for not knowing or doing things that makes them African. And it's like, okay, but you've not even taken these kids back home. You're not even speaking the languages to these kids. But it'd be like, oh yeah, it's not gonna be good. It's not gonna be good for them, or it might just affect how they are in the society. And which is quite interesting, because when I was in Nigeria, it's funny how obviously I exchanged some messages to you in Yoruba, but it's funny how when I was actually growing up, my parents didn't even teach me Yoruba.
Didn't want us to speak Yoruba.
He didn't want me to speak Yoruba.
Yes.
And this is not even a joke. It's true. I grew up in Nigeria, and this is the thing. It was like he didn't want me to speak Yoruba. He didn't teach me Yoruba. I had to learn Yoruba off eavesdropping. And
not even eavesdropping. We had like help in the house.
And we had
we speak it to them.
And basically we and obviously in secondary school as well, we had like they taught us Yoruba, which was really great. But till this day, my dad doesn't even speak to me in Yoruba, and it's a thing where then he gets pissed when I don't really do things that are really like African-like. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, for example, when I was growing up, I used to like kneel to greet my dad, but obviously these days I just like hug him or some stuff, and it's just like, do you know what I'm trying to say? But it's just like a lot of the problems that we face roots to our parents, and I think it's just down to us as people to sort of decide to change that.
But your parents were probably doing it more to protect you guys. You know, they still want you to know who you are, but at the same time, because their parents, they've probably been through all of the, you know, struggles of trying to come here. So they kind of want you guys to be able to adapt. But I want to go back to what your big brother was speaking about, how that girl felt like she wanted to know who she was. So could you picture as a people to come here, and even just with our great grandfathers being murdered or sent off to prison, and you know, it's still happening today, but
yeah,
and so you don't have anywhere to really turn to find out who you are or where to go. So like for me, when I went to Nigeria for the first time, I cried like a baby, and it was natural tears. I felt like I finally met my mother.
Did you?
I felt like I've been adopted all my life, and I finally met my mother. Like, that's the feeling I felt. And every time I leave, I cry. Like, I never want to come back. So, like, it bothers me, because I just feel like just like a Chinese person, like I say, they can be born here. It can be 3 generations in, but we still consider them Chinese. And just like you guys were miseducated, we were as well, because we were taught that African children, they had flies coming out their head, they were malnourished,
African boo boo or something.
You know, and I seen in one of my son, he has it was a history book, and it said that Africans migrated to America for work, and I'm like, we migrated, absolutely, you know? So
you see what whitewashing,
whitewashing history, man.
Someone wanted to ask you guys. It's saying if they have 2 generations of children in the UK, do they still consider them African back home, or are they now considered foreigners? You have a child, and you take your child back home, are they still considered Nigerian or African?
As long as you have the roots, like you're originally from Africa, you're African. There's nothing I know a guy, he's literally white, yeah? But his grandmother was black. Like his grandmother and his grandparents were Nigerian. Do you understand? but his mom got married to like a white guy, and I'm telling you, when you see him, you just
Yeah,
mistake
like a
him for a
second
white guy. Do you
generation.
understand?
Yeah, second
But he's
generation.
black. No
But
matter
you
what
guys
you're gonna
consider
say
him
about it, yeah.
Nigerian.
Yeah, he's Nigerian. Like the thing is, we have this ideology where pigmentation is just like, which is a false
I don't think.
ideology because people, even white people, were what's it called, generated from Ethiopia. People have this idea that okay, yeah, even if he's not black or anything, he's not from Africa. But personally, I don't believe that.
I think the question it goes back to the what do you define by where you're from? Do you define it by where your roots are from? Are you defining it by where you were born and raised, where you were born, or are you defining it by where you were raised or born and raised?
That's
Personally,
why I
for
say I'm
me,
an Americanized African because I was
there we
born
go.
here, but I am still African.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So it's kind of like that with if I had kids here and they go back to Nigeria, I wouldn't really consider them British at the same time. I really consider them Nigerian. I'll be
you
like
call me Fulani.
you're Nigerian, you're British Nigerians. Yeah, maybe that's the right word to say. Like you're British
That's
Nigerians.
what. That's.
I mean you're Nigerians, but at the same time it's like you are influenced by the society you're raised in, and you don't want to take that away from them, even though you remind them and say African, you are Nigerian, right? But at the same time, you need to understand that, oh yeah, I wasn't sort of raised in society, even in as much as I'm close to these roots and I identify these roots, but I need to also realize that, yeah, I'm British Nigerian. I'm Nigerian, but yeah, I am British. Like you said, the statement you made, but just in the British form. So yeah, I think that's
So,
what
but
answers the
how
question.
come we don't have that same, like, okay, so say when I meet a native Nigerian and they find out my name
Yeah,
is Fumi, it's like, oh, hey, but when if I just say my name is Jennifer or, and I'm still just as the same person as I was when my name was Fumi, but it's like they
mm,
embrace me more when they find out that,
yeah. Is it
that
when
bothers me also. It's kind of like,
You kind of
is it like you as a foreigner, like black African American
we can
coming
be
to Nigeria?
here. We can be here in America, and when
the
they
thing
Yeah,
is
find
the
out
thing
my
hold
name
is
on
is
too.
Fumi, they treat me different.
Like in a good way or in a bad way?
In a good way. When they find out
What?
that okay, so I'm not a native Nigerian. Like
Yeah, of
my
course I know that.
my DNA said Benin/Togo. It's just that
Yeah,
once
yeah,
I
yeah,
started studying the African culture and stuff like that, I
yeah.
connected with Yoruba culture,
The Yoruba
especially when I'm
culture. Yeah,
learning
yeah,
about the Orishas and Ifa and
yeah, yeah,
just the language, like everything about it and who I'm named
yeah.
after. But it's like if I don't say that I, let them know that I've been there and that I've studied the culture, they treat me like just any other Akata.
So you not use that word. I thought because I just before we get into that because from what I remember from our side, like that's a bit like
I
it's
don't want to say, I hate that name, but this is
yeah, yeah,
how
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've
But
been treated when I've been looked at as just a regular African American woman, as opposed to
yeah,
one that has been to. I've been to a lot more places in Nigeria than a lot of Nigerians that I've met. When I tell them the places that I've been, they're like, "What?" I just want us to get to a place where we're able to
yeah.
look at each other as siblings.
thing is about the whole Fumi thing, yeah. It just boils down to you being more comfortable with what you're familiar with. Do you understand? For instance, like what do you like?
What do you mean? What
Just
do
give
I
me
like?
one random thing you like.
Yeah, what do you mean? I don't get it.
I
Like
love
maybe
spirituality.
sports. Okay, spirituality. For instance, let's say you go back to Nigeria, yeah? Then you find someone who practices the same type of spirituality you practice. You're more prone to being or feeling more at home with that person. And if you found someone who, how would I put it, practices a different type, do you get me? We're just more
You relate more.
susceptible to being, yeah, exactly. Because you feel more accepted because okay, this person has more similarities to me than this other person. So I'm definitely gonna feel more at home here than over there. Do you feel me?
We have to change that narrative. Like we have to start embracing each other. and we have to say, you know what's going on? Like, that's like if I was I'm in Georgia now, and there was a war amongst New Yorkers. I got to go with the New Yorkers because that's where I come from.
That's family,
Even though
man.
I love Atlanta, I love Georgia, but I come from. So I feel like it's the same thing. Like, just because you guys are over there in Africa, if something happens to an African here, whether they are African American or Jamaican African or whatever African, we all need to stand up and fight for that cause. Because I don't see too many Native Africans speaking on what's going on in the Black community right now. Just like I don't see too many Muslims and, other groups of people I don't see speaking on it. But for me, it really hurts my heart that I don't see Native Africans sticking up for us.
I'm not sure. Well, in regards to like George Floyd, rest his soul, whole movement, you actually had two of it in Nigeria. You had one in Lagos and had one in Abuja. Like the people that, the Black Lives Matter, and have a look at all the countries who protested. Nigeria was both Lagos and Abuja. They literally did a Black Lives Matter protest. Well, back to the question about our differences. You know what's quite interesting, really, and is that especially here in the UK, is obviously coming from Nigeria and observing the Black community here. You realize that even in the Black community in the UK, I'm sure it's quite different in America. I can't really speak for Americans, but there's already a division between the Caribbeans and Africans.
Really?
That's already it's a big thing.
100%.
It's a huge thing.
Wow.
I mean, people are starting to become less ignorant, but I'll be speaking to people from the Caribbean descent and people from African descent, and understanding their experiences. There's a huge divide between Africans.
Not as much as it used to be.
But it's not as much as it used to be. But you still get some people that still have these odd statements here and there. So then think about someone who's fresh from the Caribbean and someone who's fresh from Africa. It's just like another layer. Because already between the blacks here, between the Caribbean and Africans, it's not like they don't get along. I mean, we do get along, but back then it was such a big thing. For example, from the African side, what I did realize, a lot of them were ashamed to be Africans. It was like a lot of them used to lie that they were Caribbeans just to get along with the Caribbeans. And from the Caribbean side, it's like, from what I've heard anyway, from the people I speak to, it's always like you're bush or you're, there's just always these statements made about, it's kind of like how some African Americans view African sort of thing.
Yeah,
that's kind of what.
School growing up.
There we go. That's kind of the same thing that was going on here. I don't know, about like a couple of weeks ago, there was like a what do you call it? There was like a clash. It was like a sound clash. Like the verses that happens when two artists. Who was the one that happened?
The competition.
Like the face up. Yeah. So there was one here that was like Wizkid versus Vybz Kartel, right? New York. So you should know about the dancehall, yeah. So like there was this huge ass, like, I think the people who organized it, they had like up to, how much was like 700K?
What, listeners?
Listeners, yeah.
Yeah. 99K, actually.
Oh, 99K people.
There were a lot of.
Yeah. So and that. Yeah, there was one for like Vybz Kartel versus Wizkid, and obviously like that sort of, I don't want to say encourage. It's not, the idea behind it was to bring people together and like rep your people, but in a respectful manner.
Encourage the division. Let's talk about what are we gonna do about it.
Yeah, I mean, from here, I'd say, at the end of the day, like there's this artist. Well, he's more like an activist poet here. His name is Akala, and there's one, I don't really listen to him that much, but there was one song I listened to, I just don't remember. And he said one thing that just stuck to my head, and I've never forgotten it. It's like, the most rebellious thing you could do is to stay educated. Education is the one thing. Like, knowledge is power. However way you want to see it, knowledge is power. And I feel like if we educate ourselves more, and from a young age, like the next generation, educating them about a lot of foreign experiences, but black foreign experiences, just not the African. Like, for example, I just knew about the Nigerian experience until I moved here and I started to because I'm just a curious person, I start to read into the culture and everything. Then I start to understand the Black British experience, and I feel like that should be a similar thing that should happen for our kids or the generation that's to come. Start understanding where we have a common ground, how we disperse, why we are similar, and once we can, I don't think we should wait for like the government or wait for schools to teach these kind of things. It's more our duty as parents, even though I'm not a parent, but our duty as parents to encourage that. And in a perfect ideal world, I want a Black neighborhood. Like, even though it's like really, it's hard to find that like sort of here, but grow like it's kind of like what's that video I was watching the other day, like the Black Wall Street, something similar. That would be like the dream, but it's like a collaboration between Africans and Caribbeans, and we just have that common ground where we understand we have cultural differences, but at the end of the day, we are still similar in a lot of things. And if we concentrate on the things that make us who we that make us similar, rather than the things that make us different, then like it's got in the next 2-3 generations, there's not even gonna be diaspora wars. There's not gonna be.
I hope so.
I hope so personally, but
because even if like my goal, my job, since I've been going back and forth to Nigeria, I have been educating people on how it's nothing like what we have been taught. Like, I mean, I go down there, I have fun, I go to clubs, you know, I'm treated with respect, you know, it's so much different than what I thought it was. And that is my duty, to educate people here on going back and just seeing it for themselves. And I remember growing up in school, there was always like 1 or 2 Native African people in the class, and I would see my fellow African American people just be so mean to them and treat them, you know, the African booty scratcher and all
booty scratcher. Yeah, I heard about that.
Oh man, but it was always in my spirit. Like, I would be the only person in class that was nice to him, and it's going all the way up until I even knew that I was African. Until I didn't even start considering myself African until about 2014. Like, I just said I was Black, you know. But it wasn't until I started educating myself and meeting Native Africans that I realized, like, you know, I feel a connection here. And I feel like
100%.
If they would have educated you guys more on the history behind what happened to us and why we were brought here, I think that would really give you guys more compassion and understanding for why we are. It's like having your mother, like your mother raised you two, or you know, you boys, and then she had another child, but that child was sent away, and that child was raised by, you know, God knows who, drug addicts, or, you know, one parent homes or whatever. So it's like you got to have that understanding as a sibling that was raised with the culture and with the mother and father and the grandparents and all of that, and look at us as if we are the children that were sent away, and we don't have that. So like when you look at us and think of kata, they, you know, they're ghetto and they're dirty and they kill each other and all of this. That's just like with the movie with the Black Panther. This is what I feel like the American Blacks, the African Americans, we are leading the revolution. We are fighting back, and y'all need to come on and join the revolution.
100%. The revolution will be televised. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we need more. I don't want to say maybe we need more representation in the sense in certain communities of our different backgrounds for us to maybe understand or maybe be more acceptable towards things. But I don't know how it is.
Though it's really the same. Like the music, the food is always the same. Stew chicken, curry chicken, oxtail. It's all the same. It's just a little bit different. But it's still all the same. Especially when we're living in this world where the white man is in control. You know, I think that we need now more than ever, because we shouldn't have to have just a Black Wall Street. We got a whole continent, not even just Africa. America is melanated as well. Like the Europeans, I don't even want to get into all of that, but all of the earth is our turf.
Free, man.
The earth is our turf. We are the first and we are the last. And until we unite, and not even just thinking about differences or similarities, until we realize that we
100%.
We're the Alpha and the Omega. We are the Christ
100%.
that needs to save the world.
Preach.
It's the truth. Until we step
up, I agree with you.
Heal ourselves and learn self-love amongst each other, I feel like the world is going to continue shitting on us, stepping on us, separating us. So we got to make the change.
We gotta come together, like you said, like we gotta come together. We gotta like realize that, listen, you're my brother, you're my sister. It don't matter where you're from. At the end of the day, like, I don't know, you're a nigga, I'm a nigga. I'm trying to say, like, That's just it's just the truth at the end of the day. When it doesn't have, I don't know, it just feels so sad that you have to prove yourself, or you have to take some DNA test to realize that, oh yeah, you see, I'm from you, or I'm like you. You know what I'm trying to say, it's a bit nuts. But I think division is what causes us to not achieve like the goal we want. We actually we want to achieve as people. And yeah, like if we come together, like there's nothing they could do.
What's that African parable? It says that when two brothers are fighting, the enemy can come and steal their home. It's this, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the exact thing you're talking about. And it's so crazy because a lot of like growing up in Nigeria, right? A lot of the literature we're being taught wasn't even African literature. Do you know that? Like, and it was so nuts. And it's just, it's like
you know, Nigeria was named the most educated people in the world recently.
Yeah.
And for
I saw that.
Nigerians to send their children across the world to think that they're going to get a better educator than themselves, I think it's awesome. I mean, I know that you guys are happy that you're able to go and travel and stuff, but it's just weird to me. Like, how are you the most educated people in the world, but yet you feel that sending your children away for an education is good? That's just like here in the Black community. We want, we want to, have our children know who we are and love each other, but yet we still continue to send our children to these schools that are dismissing our real history.
But I think I could definitely have a speak on that. I think the problem is where a lot of the Nigerian society is quite interesting, because I think the situation with education in Nigeria is quite interesting, because we feel like, because the system is so corrupt, corruption is like it's the big thing. Like, everyone knows, like, ask any Tom, Dick, and Harry, with the amount of resources we have, with the amount of potential power. I can't speak for the rest of Africa, but I know Nigeria, with the amount of power we have, we could do boy. But the problem is, because of corruption, like, even the education system is very corrupt. And it's a thing where we feel like, okay, my kids could definitely do better. Let's take them elsewhere, because here is good, but I know they could get better elsewhere, because the system is so corrupt. Like, I don't even want to start talking about the Nigerian educational system.
But people like you and I, like this new wave of children that's growing. We have to start building our own schools so that we can change the narrative of what's being taught in the school systems. Generations, they're kind of stuck in their ways.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to do this with us.
100%. And the thing is, I feel like with education, like, I don't know about you, but for example, I work within IT and stuff. And one of my life goals that I realized I want to do this year, well, not do this year, but it came to me this year, is like, I want to be able to set up like an IT academy or something in Nigeria at some point, because I realized my journey through IT, because I started really young, and I realized when I speak to people that studied the same thing back home, is very different, and there's so much. It could be so accessible to them. Like, I didn't need to come here or like be in some fancy institution to know what I know. A lot of the things I learned is things that I taught myself, and things that you just need the internet, really. And one thing I did say to myself, it's such a big. If there's one thing I definitely want to do, is create opportunity for people.
Okay, so what do you think about religion? Do you think religion has something to do with the separation of us, or why we're in the state that we're in?
Very, 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 very good question.
I think personally, religion has been, how would I put it, distorted every century, every millennia, wherever the past is, like, literally, because obviously the messages were passed down to man and all of that, be it Islam or Christianity or anything, and people tailored it to suit their own personal needs. And that is what is being preached in churches and mosques and everything. And some of these things, when you literally, like, critically think about them, you're like, this actually does not make any sense. This is not right. But why are you preaching something that contradicts what you say we should be doing? Do you understand? There's like a whole paradox there, and people don't normally realize it. And that's the unfortunate thing for Nigeria, because someone said opium is the
religion is the opium of the masses. What's his name? Oscar Wilde.
And that's Nigeria is a huge case study, because people would see wrong things happen in churches or mosques and anything. But because it's a pastor or an imam that did it, they would look the other way.
One of the things that bothered me when I first went down there was that I wanted to learn African spirituality. Culture. And they're trying to preach to me about Jesus, and I'm just like,
listen, let me.
Like, what's your name? And they're like, Bobby or Tom, and I'm
Jessica,
like,
Tom, or something like that.
But
right, basically,
Yoruba, I know some Yoruba people who are afraid of their culture, and I'm like, you don't want to talk about traditions? Let's talk
Listen,
about Shango. Like, you want to talk about
listen,
Moses.
yeah. Let me say something, right? With religion, it's very good that you brought that up. The thing with religion in Nigeria, right, is we as in general, before I start talking about Yoruba people, in general, like Africans are spiritual people. We are very like it's just in our nature, even in the culture, in as much as we try to get away from it, even me, for example, I myself, Taiwo, right? If you look into history of why I am Taiwo, it's a spiritual thing.
The Gemini twins, I already know.
The Gemini twins. We were actually gods that were being, and even funnily enough, my grandma, and it was until I grew up, I realized later on, even though my grandma was Muslim, some practices that she was doing were like Nigerian Yoruba spirituality. Like for example, with twins now, there's like a special day. I think it's Wednesday. If I remember, Thursday. You have to feed them a special type of black-eyed peas. We call it ewabeji. It's like it's beans, but you have to feed them on this special day. My grandma used to do a lot. I just didn't realize it. But she was Muslim. So the thing about religion in Nigeria is because of how Islam and Christianity came to take over the country, a lot of people fear, like you said, literally they fear our spirituality, what was actually there before us. No matter the generation you speak about, they don't fuck with that shit because they feel like, oh yeah, the Islam has come, Christianity has come, we've been saved, and this is the right way. We don't need to do these things anymore. And it's so funny because around the time when these things were happening was when we were losing our wealth and when we were losing our power and we're losing who we actually were. And it's so ingrained in the system that when I was even doing some research about Yoruba spirituality, my mom caught me and she was like, have I decided to become Olorisha? Basically someone who practices that. And I just like, nah, I'm not trying to be one per se, but it was a thing where I want to educate myself. I want to know, because also this isn't even taught in the Nigerian culture. Like we used to have religious studies, right? And the religious studies had to be Islam or Christianity. And growing up and back in secondary school back there, it's like, you have to pick one. Do you want to study Islamic religious studies or you want to study Christian religious studies? And it's so crazy because a lot of, even when you try to educate Yorubas, educate Nigerians about, oh, this is our spirituality, this is what our ancestors used to practice, and this is how things were before everything just fucked up. It's like, oh no, it's a taboo, this, that, this, and it's so ingrained that even anyone, your average Yoruba person I try to speak to about it, just be like, no, even you've experienced, you've been to Nigeria, you've seen it yourself. And it's so crazy because, you know, a lot of our names has religious ties to it. For example, if someone was bearing Ogun Tade, basically, right? There we go. You're quite learned in this department. You know what I'm trying to say? So it's like, even back to our names, it literally is there, but it's just the stigma and the introduction of the Western religion that caused us to sort of forget our roots. And I want to say it's part of the problems that Nigeria even has today, because a lot of people can't even think for themselves. Everything is like hope is like opium, you know. It's like a drug. You sell someone some hope of some god and practices that everything's going to be better. Even though things were great before you introduced what you're introducing to us, they cling on to that and just always pray for something good to happen. And
I have a Yoruba woman who thinks I am a witch, but she looks at me like I'm like an evil witch because I practice her native culture.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's so sickening. I be just like, dude, this is your culture.
Can I read you something? Yeah, I discovered this today. So basically, it's a letter from Lord Macaulay addressing the British Parliament.
I was speaking about that earlier with my guy. We were talking about that. That's so
yeah. Funny. So basically, he said this was on the 2nd of February, 1835. Yeah. He said, I have traveled across the length and breadth of Africa, and I have not seen one person who's a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is a spiritual and cultural heritage. And therefore, I propose that we replace our old and ancient education system, our culture, for if the Africans think that all this is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation.
Just like the
100%.
Willie Lynch
Basically,
letter.
It's funny because we were talking about the Willie Lynch letter yesterday, and it's what's so crazy is like I don't know if you know about Chinua Achebe. He's like all you need to, if you're really into this, you definitely
read Things Fall Apart.
Things Fall Apart is literally Things Fall Apart is a book about how colonialism came to Nigeria and back in the early days how we used to fight it and how it eventually took over, something along those lines. Anyway, there's one quote from the book that was talking about how the Igbos, this was amongst the Igbo people, right? And it was talking about how Igbos, they were getting along very well. You know, everyone was cool, everything was all right. Eventually, the whites came and they don't even speak your tongue. They don't understand the customs of your land. And they came to tell you that what you're doing is wrong. And eventually, the person inside in the book was like, say something along the lines of, how can someone who doesn't speak our language, doesn't understand our customs, tell us what we're doing is wrong? And obviously, all it takes is just to poison one person's ear. The person starts speaking to similar people, and then you have a rebellion, and people just start fighting. These are the things this is how it started. And it's funny because someone here just mentioned a guy called Ajayi Crowther, and it's very that person said a very interesting thing, because Ajayi Crowther was a slave that got taken from Nigeria, I think it was to Brazil, and he came back. This is how crazy it is. For example, like in Yoruba language, right? Satan is called Ishu, right? And what happened, the history behind how that became to be, was because this guy, Ajayi Crowther, he wrote the first Bible in Yoruba to practice, spread Christianity around around them times. He basically, Ishu, which is like a god, like a Yoruba god, was like, he wasn't a demon per se. I think it was like a trickster, but it wasn't.
That's Papa
He was
Legba,
like
or...
Papa Legba, yes, Papa Legba. There we go, like the Haitian Papa Legba, yeah, exactly. But Ishu wasn't Satan, and just so this guy could find a way to push the religion, he then took a god that they are more familiar with and twisted it against them to pass the religion. And even till today, ask any Yoruba person, what do you call Satan in Yoruba? They will say Ishu. But Ishu is not Satan. Ishu is just another Orisha, like Ibeji.